And as the quiet truth of your own unseen power begins to stir within you, there comes a moment when you sense that nothing in your life has been random, not even the timing of your desires. You begin to feel that there is a rhythm, a pulse, an invisible appointment set long before your senses knew it. Most chase luck as though it were a bird that might land on their shoulder if they stand in the right place at the right hour. But the divine truth is that the hour and the place are born within you first. The world does not bring you your appointed day. You carry it in your own being until it appears in the calendar of your life. You are told, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. This is not about the turning of the earth alone, but the turning of your own inner world. The date you call right is the outpicturing of an inner conviction so settled, so complete, that the outer world can only bow to it. Imagine this: before the seed breaks open beneath the soil, there is already a day appointed for its green shoot to meet the sun. That day is not chosen by the sun, but by the life within the seed. So it is with you. The lottery you speak of is not a game of numbers, but the mirror of your own certainty. The ticket in your hand is only the shadow of the belief in your heart. To play on this exact date is not about waiting for fortune to smile. It is about entering the state in which the date has no choice but to find you. You do not guess it. You remember it. For all that you call future is only a memory in God's mind, and God's mind is your own imagination. Feel the difference between wishing and remembering. Wishing says, I hope this will happen. Remembering says, it is already so, and the world will catch up. You take the act, whether marking numbers, or walking to the counter, or holding the slip, not to cause the result, but to align yourself with the result that already is. On that day, you will move without strain, as if the wind itself were carrying you. You will feel the stillness of knowing, rather than the tension of hoping. And there are words, not magic syllables, not charms, but living seeds, that you speak to water the certainty. When you say them, they are not to convince the world but to confirm yourself. They must be spoken from the end, as one who has already received. Not, I will win, but I have received. Not, please let it happen, but it is finished. These are not commands to the outer world, they are agreements with the inner. For the only world you ever command is the one within, and it obeys without resistance when you speak as its rightful ruler. The outer hearing of these words is not important. You may say them aloud, or in the secret place where no ear hears but your own. What matters is the feeling that wraps them, the living garment you clothe them in. Without that feeling, they are shells. With it they are the word made flesh, and once spoken in this way, they will continue to echo through the silence until the outer scene takes shape. You must understand, the date is not something you hunt for with anxious eyes scanning a calendar. It is something you feel, like the scent of rain, before the first drop touches the ground. You may be led to mark a certain day, and when you do, it will not feel like a guess. It will feel like recognition, and when that recognition comes, your part is to walk into it as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world, because in truth it is. To the world it will look like chance. To you it will be the inevitable unfolding of what you already knew. But there is a deeper mystery still, for even the act of feeling that recognition is born from another assumption, one so hidden that most never touch it. It is the assumption that you are already one with the giver of all things, and that nothing you seek lies outside yourself. Without this, the date and the words are only rituals. With it they are the echo of eternity breaking into time. And this leads us into the quiet yet terrifying truth most do not wish to face. And as you stand before that quiet yet terrifying truth, you realize it is not terror as the world knows it, but the holy fear that comes when you sense you are dealing with something absolute. To know that nothing is outside you, not the date, not the numbers, not even the seeming chance of the draw, is to stand in the place where the veil between cause and effect is torn. Most are content to live with the veil in place, for it gives them the comfort of believing in accidents, in fortune, in events that happen to them. But when you see that the only happening is the happening within you, the ground beneath your feet changes. You are no longer a player in the game, you are the dreamer of the game itself. In that awareness, the idea of this exact date becomes something different. It is no longer a superstition, nor a piece of advice you follow from another. It is an inward appointment you keep with yourself. The world may call it coincidence when the date you felt in secret matches the day the numbers align, but you will know it as the moment your inner and outer worlds met without resistance. For you had already arrived there in imagination long before your body arrived in time. When you walk into that day, it will not feel like waiting for the unknown. It will feel like the morning after a long night's journey, when you already know what the letter on the table contains before you break the seal. This is what living in the end means, that the act is complete in consciousness before it begins in matter. You have tasted the harvest before you have sown in the eyes of others, yet in truth the sowing was done in the silent field of your own being. The words you speak on that day, the this you are told to say, will not be for luck. They will be the final stone placed upon the altar of your own faith. They will sound simple, perhaps too simple for the mind that craves ritual and elaborate ceremony. Yet their power will be in the stillness with which you speak them, and the authority that flows not from force but from knowing. It may be only a breath, a soft utterance, as gentle as one saying, "Thank you" to an old friend. But in that thank you lies the universe rearranged. For remember this, the power is not in the day, nor in the words, nor in the ticket, but in the consciousness that has already accepted the gift. The date is the reflection of your readiness. The words are the crystallization of your assumption. The ticket is the visible echo of the invisible fact. Nothing is added to you on that day. You are only witnessing what was complete before the foundation of the world. This is why you must dwell often in the silence before that day comes, not to strain for the vision, but to rest in the certainty that it is already yours. In that rest, images may arise unbidden, the glow of a morning, the feeling of holding a slip of paper, the sound of your own laughter. Do not force them, let them float as petals on still water, for they are the language of the inner world speaking to itself. And when they fade, remain in the knowing they left behind, for the knowing is the seed. You may notice, in the days before the appointed one, that the outer world begins to echo your inner certainty in small, almost imperceptible ways. A stranger's words, a headline, a passing thought, each a whisper reminding you of what you already hold. These are not signs to seek anxiously, but gentle nods from the reality you have birthed within. Like the soft warmth before sunrise, they are evidence of what cannot be stopped. And yet there is a still deeper layer to this, one that the mind often resists. For even the date you felt so clearly is itself part of a larger unfolding, one that has no beginning and no end. When you touch this truth, you begin to see that you do not choose the moment any more than the seed chooses the season. You are moved by something vast, and yet that vastness is yourself. And this opens a door that very few dare step through, though it leads to the greatest freedom you will ever know. And as you sense that vastness moving you, there is a strange ease that begins to rise, as if the weight of choosing, deciding and controlling has been lifted from your hands. You see that what you once called your decision was always the flowering of a deeper intention, one that existed before you even knew the desire. That deeper current carries you without struggle, arranging circumstances with a precision the intellect could never plan. You begin to walk through your days, as though each step is already prepared, the invisible path unrolling beneath your feet in perfect time. It is here that the appointed date becomes more than a point on a calendar. It becomes a living appointment with yourself, a meeting arranged in eternity, waiting only for you to arrive in awareness. You do not race toward it. You are drawn to it as the tide is drawn to the shore. It calls you not with urgency, but with inevitability, as though it has been humming in the background of your life all along. And when the moment comes, it will feel not like a surprise, but like the soft recognition of a face you have always known. On that day, the outer world will appear unchanged to the casual eye. The same light will fall on the streets, the same rhythm will carry the hours, and yet to you, there will be an almost imperceptible shift, a depth in the air, a clarity in the space around you. You will walk into it as one stepping into a familiar dream, aware of both the dream and the dreamer. You will hold the ticket, not as a token of chance, but as a tangible echo of what has already been decreed in the silence of your own consciousness. When you speak the words, the quiet affirmation that seals the act, you will find they do not come from the surface of your mind, but from the stillness beneath all thought. They will carry no strain, no reaching, no asking. They will feel like the final stroke on a canvas already complete, the last note of a song that has been playing since before you learned to hear. Whether whispered aloud or breathed within, they will confirm what is already so, and in that confirmation, the outer scene will align, for it has no choice but to mirror the conviction that gave it birth. You will notice something subtle here. The peace you feel in that moment will be the same peace you felt in the imagination long before the event. The win will not bring the peace will have brought the win. This is the mystery the world overlooks, chasing outer results to create inner states. never realizing that the inner state is the only cause. Peace, be still, was never a command to the sea alone, but to the restless waves of the mind. The days after may unfold in ways your reason could never have mapped. Perhaps the confirmation comes swiftly, or perhaps it arrives in layers, each one revealing a part of the promise. Yet however it comes, it will feel inevitable, like the closing of a circle. You will see how the threads, every small action, every impulse, every seeming delay, were woven together by a hand that was your own, though it appeared as the hand of the world. And once you have seen this, truly seen it, something else awakens, a realization that this power was never limited to one desire, one event, or one date. The law you have used here is the law that governs all creation. The same inner movement that brought this moment into form can bring any scene, any state, any destiny into being. And this begins to dissolve the boundaries of what you thought possible, opening a horizon far beyond the game of chance the world believes in. And as the horizon of possibility begins to widen before you, there is a tenderness in the realization that the same power which shaped this singular day has been shaping every breath you have ever taken. You see that nothing in your life was ever small, that every moment was the seed of another, and that each scene, whether you called it joy or loss, was born from the same invisible root. The lottery ticket, the chosen date, the quiet words, these are only symbols of something far more profound, the recognition that you are the source, and the stage upon which all events unfold. It is in this recognition that the weight of the outer world begins to dissolve. You no longer wait for permission from circumstances, you no longer ask whether this is your moment, for you understand that the moment is never granted by time, but by assumption. And in this understanding, the appointed day is not a gift from the calendar, but a mirror of the state you have already occupied in the stillness of imagination. You live as though the result were behind you, and so the result must come before you. There is a sacred rhythm to this, that the mind cannot chart, for the mind seeks straight lines and measurable steps, but creation moves in curves and spirals. The mind asks, how will this happen? But the law answers only, it is done. That is why the date you feel in the quiet of your heart is not the product of calculation, but of alignment. You are not solving for a future outcome, you are remembering a finished work. And as you remember, the path to that day becomes effortless, as though each choice were guided by an unseen hand. When you stand within the state of the wish fulfilled, even before the outer has changed, you begin to see reflections of it everywhere. A fragment of conversation, a glimpse of numbers, a dream upon waking, each becomes a whisper from the reality you have chosen. These are not signs you chase, they are confirmations you receive. And with each one, the conviction deepens, until the date you once felt faintly becomes as certain as yesterday's sunrise. On that day, when you act outwardly, purchasing the ticket, marking the numbers, speaking the quiet words, you will feel no rush, no pulse of desperation. You will move as though it could not be otherwise. The words will not be spoken to make it happen, they will be spoken because it has already happened. And in that difference lies the whole secret, for the one who asks is still waiting, but the one who thanks has already received. This is why gratitude spoken from the end is the most potent prayer, for it carries no plea, only possession. Even after the moment has passed, you will sense that something irreversible has occurred. It will not be the money alone, nor the visible proof of your win, but the deep awareness that the outer was only the shadow of the inner, and that the inner obeys you when you live in the end. And if this is true for the lottery, it is true for every area of life. The same inner law that bends the numbers will bend the path of your days, your relationships, your health, your very sense of self. You may find, in the stillness after, that the desire to repeat the act is replaced by a greater desire, not to play with chance, but to live as the author of all scenes. For once you have seen the law in operation, you will no longer ask whether it works. You will ask only how fully you are willing to claim what is already yours. And as that question echoes within you, another truth stirs beneath it, a truth that will draw you deeper still. And as that deeper truth begins to stir, you feel it like a current, beneath still water, unseen on the surface, yet moving everything it touches. It is the quiet realization that the true purpose of this demonstration was never the prize itself, but the unveiling of who you are. The win, the date, the words, they were the mirror. The face in that mirror is the revelation. You are not the seeker of outcomes, you are the source from which outcomes flow. And once you have seen this, You cannot return to the smallness of believing that anything comes to you by chance. This is why the chosen date was not plucked from the air, nor guided by superstition, but born from the state you had already entered. The state itself determined the just as fruit ripens not because you will it, but because the life within it has reached its fullness, so too does your desire ripen into form, when the inner conviction has matured. To the world it appears sudden, to you it is simply the moment when the invisible becomes visible. In that moment, you realize something even more profound. There was never a gap between the inner and the outer. The delay you thought you endured was only the time it took for you to accept, without wavering, that what you imagined was already yours. Time itself is not the bringer of manifestation, it is the stage upon which your acceptance becomes visible. When you stood in the end, the play had already reached its conclusion, and the appointed date was only the scene in which you saw it with your senses. This is why you could walk into that day without the fever of hope or the ache of waiting. You moved through it like a memory being replayed. The outer actions, buying the ticket, speaking the words, holding the slip, were not causes, but acknowledgments. They were physical gestures that mirrored the invisible act that had taken place in you long before, and when the result appeared, it was not a shock, but a recognition. If you listen closely, you will hear the same principle whispered in the ancient words, "Before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear." This is the nature of creation. The answer exists before the request is formed, because the request and the answer are the same event in different garments. The date, the when, the feeling, all are different names for the same truth, your assumption made flesh. From this vantage, you can see how the mind's constant reaching for signs, confirmations and reassurances is unnecessary. The only sign you ever need is the state itself. When you can dwell in the feeling of having received without strain, without looking over your shoulder to see if it has arrived, you have already arrived. The calendar will bend, the numbers will align, the circumstances will rearrange, not to give you something new, but to reflect what you have accepted as already done. And now a greater invitation begins to emerge, the call to live your whole life this way, not only in moments of high desire or dramatic gain, but in the quiet, daily unfolding of being. To see each morning, not as a question mark, but as the playing out of what you have chosen in the silence. To let go of chasing the visible, and instead to move only from the invisible fact that all you seek is already within you. For when you walk in this awareness, you will find that the need to manipulate outer events fades. You will no longer ask, when will it happen, but how will I express it now that it is already so? And in that shift lies the true wealth, the freedom to create without waiting, the joy of knowing that every date is yours to appoint, and that the next revelation is already waiting in the wings of your own imagination, ready to take the stage. And as you rest in that freedom, you begin to see that the true gift of this law is not in the single moment of gain, but in the quiet mastery over the unfolding of your days. The lottery, the exact date, the sacred words, these become a doorway through which you step into a larger truth, a truth that whispers to you in the still hours, when the world is silent. You begin to feel the weightless authority of one who knows that all things are delivered from within, that nothing can be withheld from the consciousness that has already claimed it. This is the holy ease that replaces the fever of striving. You no longer reach outward for evidence. You allow the evidence to rise, unforced from the state you inhabit. The chosen day becomes simply the point at which the invisible decree makes itself known in form. It is not the day that gives you the win, it is your state that gives the day its meaning. Without the state, the date is empty. With the state, the date cannot fail. In this awareness, the concept of exact date takes on a different texture. It is not chosen by fear, by calculation, or by superstition. It emerges naturally, like the way a flower turns toward the sun without instruction. You may notice it as a subtle pull, an inner nudge that feels more like remembering than deciding. It comes with the same certainty as recalling your own name, no hesitation, no second guessing, only the quiet confidence of recognition. And when that day arrives, you will meet it without fanfare. There will be no frantic energy, no rush to force the moment into being. You will simply live it as though it had always been yours. Your outer actions will mirror your inner knowing, steady, deliberate, unshaken. Even as you hold the ticket in your hand, the feeling will not be one of anticipation, but of completion. You will speak the appointed words, not as a request to an outside force, but as the final seal on something long settled in your heart. The world might call this faith, but you will know it as certainty, the natural certainty of a law in motion. Just as you do not doubt that a seed will sprout in its season, you do not doubt that your assumption will bear fruit on its appointed day. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. The sowing takes place in imagination, the reaping in the visible world. But to you, the harvest is already in hand before the sickle ever touches the field. What is most remarkable is that this certainty carries a softness. It does not harden you into arrogance or pride, for you know that the power you wield is not personal possession, but divine inheritance. It humbles you even as it empowers you. You feel yourself as both the vessel and the source, the dreamer and the dream, and from this humility, your creations flow without resistance. As you begin to live from this place more and more, you find that the lines between waiting and receiving dissolve. You are always in the act of receiving, even before the senses agree. The world may still speak of luck, of odds, of probability, but you no longer think in such terms. Your measure is not chance but alignment, the alignment of your inner acceptance with the outer stage upon which it plays. And somewhere in the midst of this new way of living, another realization begins to take root, that even the desire itself, the impulse to mark a date, the words you felt to speak, were not separate acts, but one seamless movement of the same infinite self. You have never been apart from your creation, and it has never been apart from you. This seeing changes everything, for it reveals a still greater mystery that has been quietly waiting to be spoken. And as that greater mystery begins to take form in you, it becomes clear that there was never a point at which your creation began, nor a point at which it will end. What you once thought of as a single act, imagining, affirming, claiming, was in truth the unbroken movement of being itself. You were not initiating creation. You were joining in the eternal act of it. The date you felt, the words you spoke, the outcome you witnessed, all were notes in a melody that has been playing since before time was named. This is why the moment felt like recognition rather than surprise. You were not encountering something foreign to you. You were meeting yourself in a new garment. The outer scene, no matter how dazzling or improbable to the senses, was only the shadow cast by your inner light. And once you see that light as your own, the shadow no longer startles you. It simply affirms what you have always known. Here the law of assumption takes on its fullest meaning. To assume is not to pretend, not to wish, but to remember. You are remembering your true state, the one in which nothing is withheld and nothing is delayed. The lottery, the date, the whispered words. These are only symbols your mind can hold while your heart does the real work, the work of standing in the end without flinching. When you dwell in that end, you are not bending reality to your will. You are aligning your senses with what is eternally true, and this truth is not bound by the logic of the world. The world measures by odds, by statistics, by visible cause and effect. The law moves outside all such limits. It does not need the world's permission to rearrange itself around your conviction. When you know this, the tension dissolves. You do not force the outcome, nor do you fret over the steps. You move as one who has already arrived, because in consciousness you have, on the appointed day, when you carried out the outward act, the feeling that surrounded you was the true act of creation. The slip of paper in your hand was not the source of your certainty. Your certainty was the source of the slip of paper. And when you spoke the chosen words, they did not set the event in motion. They acknowledged that the event was complete. Even before you placed the ticket in your pocket, the matter was settled. The mind will try to tell you that this was a rare occurrence, a fortunate anomaly, a once-in-a-lifetime stroke of luck. But the part of you that has seen beyond the senses knows better. The same law that moved here will move wherever you direct it. If it can bend numbers, it can bend days. If it can bring you to a specific date, it can bring you to any condition, any scene, any outcome. The power is not in the object of desire, but in the awareness that it already belongs to you. And yet there is an even gentler truth beneath this, one that the restless mind often overlooks. The joy is not in the outer gain, but in the inner stillness that precedes it. The peace you felt before the result, the quiet knowing that wrapped around you, is the true treasure. For once you possess that peace, you will find that you can create without fear, without urgency, without the gnawing ache of needing the world to prove itself to you. It is here, in this deep rest, that another possibility begins to dawn. What if the exact date, the chosen words, and the result itself were simply training you to trust this rest? What if the whole experience was the spirit within you, teaching you that you can live this way, not once, not for one outcome, but for all the unfolding of your life. And as this question breathes in you, another layer of the mystery begins to open. And as that layer opens, you begin to see the delicate perfection of how it all unfolded. Not only the result, but the way your own being was guided into the knowing of it. The date you felt was not simply a point in time. It was a marker on the inner map of your awakening. The words you spoke were not merely affirmations. They were the language of your deeper self, speaking to you through the quiet corridors of imagination. And the outer event, as remarkable as it seemed, was only the visible ripple of a tide that had been moving long before you ever named it. You realize now that the true miracle was not the winning moment itself, but the transformation that took place within you before the day ever arrived. The restlessness that once urged you to look outward dissolved into a calm that needed no proof. You discovered the pleasure of walking through each day as though the outcome were already secured, and in that posture of certainty, you touched the essence of creation itself. For the law of assumption is nothing more and nothing less than the art of dwelling in that certainty until the world must yield to it. It becomes clear why the date could not have been forced. Any attempt to push toward it would have carried the scent of doubt, and doubt is the one soil in which nothing grows. The date arose effortlessly because the state itself was ripe, and from that ripeness, the moment simply revealed itself. This is why, when you think of it now, it feels inevitable, as though it could never have been otherwise. And yet within this inevitability, there was an intimacy. You were led to the place, to the moment, in such a personal way, that no one else could have walked it for you. The steps may have seemed ordinary, a choice of store, a turn of the head, a hand reaching for a ticket, but each one carried the invisible signature of the self that authored them. You were both actor and playwright, moving through the scene exactly as you had already lived it in the unseen realm. When you finally spoke the words, you did not speak them to make the moment real. You spoke them because the moment was already more real to you than the world around you. They came out not as a command, but as a remembering, a gentle yes to what had been true all along. And in that quiet agreement, the outer picture aligned itself without effort. The mind, if left to its own devices, might still try to make formulas out of this, the right date, the right words, the right posture. But the heart knows better. The power was never in the outer form. It was always in the invisible state from which the form was born. You could choose any date from that state, and the world would bow to it. You could speak any words in that state, and they would carry the fragrance of fulfillment. What remains with you now is not the thrill of chance, but the assurance of law. You have seen, with your own inner eye, that all things are delivered from the within to the without. You have felt the stillness in which the outcome is already yours, and from that stillness you have acted without strain. And this knowing cannot be unlearned. It becomes the foundation from which all other creations spring. But as you linger in this awareness, something even more profound begins to emerge. A realization that the very desire you thought was yours alone may have been the voice of something greater, calling you into a deeper remembrance. And that voice has not finished speaking. And as that voice continues to move through you, you begin to sense that what you once called desire was never a private hunger at all, but the unfolding of the infinite through the pattern of your own life. It was not that you decided to want. It was that the wanting was placed in you as a thread, leading you back to the remembrance of who you are. Even the longing for a specific date, the impulse to speak a certain phrase, the urge to hold that small piece of paper in your hand, all of it was the choreography of something far greater than your surface mind could conceive. It is here that you begin to understand why the outer world must obey. It is not obedience to a small self, shouting commands into the void. It is the harmony of the outer with the inner, the shadow conforming to the light that casts it. When you stood in the state of fulfillment, you were not imposing your will upon the world. You were revealing the will of the deeper self that already held the end from the beginning. In that unity, there was no possibility of failure. The appointed date was the meeting place between the eternal and the temporal. You felt it before you could explain it, because explanation belongs to the intellect, but recognition belongs to the spirit. The intellect will always ask for proof, but the spirit simply knows. That knowing is the true sign, and it needs nothing outside itself to confirm it. You remember the way it felt as the day approached, not the clamor of anticipation, but the quiet unfolding, like the slow turning of a flower toward the sun. Everything seemed to carry the same tone, the same hidden affirmation, a glance from a stranger, a headline glimpsed in passing, even the rhythm of your own breath. Each moment seemed to say, without words, it is done. When at last you spoke the words, those few simple syllables, you felt them leave you not as a request, but as the completion of a circuit. The feeling was not that something might happen, but that something had already settled into place, and could not be moved. And in that moment, you understood the nature of prayer, as the ancient writers meant it, not asking for what is not yet, but declaring the reality that already is. Before they call, I will answer, was no longer a verse you recited. It was an experience you had lived. The outer confirmation that followed was almost incidental. The joy, the peace, the completeness, they had come first, and they would have remained even if the numbers had never been drawn. The win was simply the echo of a truth you had already claimed. That is the real prize, the one no circumstance can add to or take away. From here the idea of living in the end no longer feels like a technique. It feels like the only way to live. You begin to apply it not only to extraordinary moments, but to the quiet desires of daily life. You wake each morning in the assumption that what you seek has already been fulfilled, and you carry that feeling as naturally as you carry your own name. The calendar no longer rules you. You rule the calendar, for every date is shaped by the state you bring to it. And yet in the soft center of this realization, another whisper rises, a question that is less about the next thing you will manifest, and more about the nature of the one who is manifesting. For if all things are reflections of your own state, then who truly are you? And as you begin to lean into that question, you feel the edges of identity itself begin to dissolve, giving way to a still greater revelation that has been waiting quietly, all along. And as the edges of identity soften, you begin to feel the vastness from which you have always moved. It is like stepping back from a painting you once studied up close. Suddenly you see not only the details you cherished, but the whole canvas, and beyond the canvas, the artist's own hand. You sense that the one who desired, the one who imagined, and the one who received, have never been three, but one. The lottery ticket, the chosen date, the sacred words, these were brushstrokes, and you were both the painter and the scene. In this light, even the concept of receiving changes. You have not been handed something you lacked. You have been shown what was already yours in the realm where time does not divide past and future. Living in the end is simply standing in that realm, while the outer catches up. You realize why the peace came before the result. Because peace belongs to the place where results are unnecessary. From that place, the world is free to arrange itself without interference, for you have already reached the conclusion. You remember the feeling of the appointed date, not as a guess or a gamble, but as a certainty that seemed to rise from nowhere, and yet carried the weight of truth. You did not choose it with the mind. You recognized it with the heart. That recognition was your permission slip, not given by some higher authority, but by the self that holds all authority. And once you granted it, the unfolding was effortless. When the day arrived and you spoke the words, they were not a performance. They were the natural expression of the state you had been living in long before your lips formed the sound. They were the outbreath after a long inhale, the release that follows fulfillment. And in that release the visible world fell into line, as faithfully as a shadow falls in the light. This is when the deeper realization settled in, that the law does not sometimes work and sometimes it only ever reflects the state you persist in. If you dwell in the end must appear. If you dwell in lack, lack must appear. The date, the words, the action, these are simply containers for the state you carry. The power is never in the container, always in the consciousness that fills it. Even now, when you think of that day, it is not the winning moment itself that stirs you, but the quiet authority you felt moving through you. That authority did not belong to a person playing a game of chance. It belonged to the one who knows there is no chance. It is the same authority that can be brought to any scene, any desire, any circumstance, without strain. And perhaps this is the real treasure the experience leaves behind, the unshakable knowing that the outer is powerless to deny the inner. The mind may try to complicate it, to assign formulas and steps, but the heart knows it is always the same. Assume it is done, live as though it is done, and it will be done. The world cannot resist the one who moves in such stillness. Yet even as this truth settles in you, there is the faint intoxicating sense that this is only the threshold. For if you are both the dreamer and the dream, the creator and the creation, then there is no boundary at all to what may be called forth. And this recognition begins to pull you, gently yet irresistibly, into a realm of possibility, far beyond what you once dared to imagine. And as that realm of possibility begins to draw you in, it is as though the walls you once thought separated one desire from another have dissolved into open air. The same stillness that brought one appointed day into form can bring any scene into being, for the law does not recognize degrees of difficulty. The world tells you some things are harder to achieve than others, that certain outcomes require more time, more effort, more luck. But you have seen through that illusion. You know now that everything is born from the same seed, a state assumed and persisted in until it shows itself. The appointed date was simply one example, chosen not because it was greater than other desires, but because it was clear enough in your heart to be carried without wavering. You lived in the end. You felt its truth, and the world mirrored it back. This is not an exception. It is the natural order. Once you understand, you cannot help but look at every desire as already complete, waiting only for your acceptance to clothe itself in form. You begin to walk through the world differently. The noise of probabilities, the calculations of odds, the voices that tell you what is and isn't possible, they no longer have weight. You hear them, but they pass through you like wind through open doors. Your attention rests instead on the invisible, on the inner scene that is more real to you than the one your senses report. You live there, and because you live there, the outer must follow. The memory of that date, that sacred moment, is now a living parable to you. You recall the ease of it, the absence of strain, the way the world seemed to rearrange itself without your pushing. Even the smallest steps, picking up the ticket, speaking the words, were done in the same calm certainty as tying your shoes or opening a door. There was no sense of making it happen. You were simply stepping into a scene that was already prepared. This is the heart of living in the end. You are not forcing the outer to match the inner. You are allowing the outer to reveal what is already true within. That is why the result feels inevitable, because in truth it was. Your inner acceptance had already sealed it long before the appointed day came, and now that inner acceptance becomes the thing you treasure above all. For you see that the peace and the power you felt are not bound to one moment or one outcome. They are the very nature of the self that imagines. You can enter that peace at will, and when you do, the form it takes in the outer world is secondary. Sometimes it will look like a windfall, sometimes like a healed relationship, sometimes like a door opening that you thought was closed forever. But always, it will carry the same fragrance, the certainty of the thing unseen. It is here, in this quiet mastery, that you begin to sense the deeper reason the desire was given to you in the first place. It was not only to show you the law at work, but to lead you to the recognition that there is no separation between you and the source of all things. What you imagined was not brought to you from elsewhere. It emerged from the infinite life you already are. And as you rest in that truth, another question begins to rise, not from curiosity, but from a deeper knowing. If every date, every word, every outcome is drawn from the same well, then what else lies there, waiting to be remembered? And the stillness within you smiles, for it already knows the answer. And as that answer stirs, unspoken yet certain, you begin to feel the depth of the well from which all creation springs. It is without bottom, without boundary, without end. The appointed day, the exact words, the visible outcome, these were but the surface ripples of a far deeper current. You see now that this current is always moving, carrying within it infinite scenes, each one complete, each one ready to be lifted into view by the hand of your assumption. This is why the moment felt so natural when it came. You did not drag it into being. You simply dipped your hand into the stream, and drew out what was already there. The act was effortless, because the reality was already whole. You did not have to build it, piece by piece. You only had to align with it until the outer world could not help but reveal it. It is here that the law of assumption shows its simplicity. The mind likes to make ladders, steps, conditions, but the truth is more like breathing. You inhale the feeling of the end. You rest in it, and without your conscious effort, the exhale takes care of itself. The exhale is the outer world, the ticket in your hand, the numbers drawn, the confirmation in form. But the inhale, the inner acceptance, is where the real creation lives. When you felt the certainty of that date, it was because you had already breathed in the truth of the scene. The words you spoke were the natural outbreath, the release of what was already finished within you, and in that release the invisible became visible. It could not fail, for there was no contradiction left in you. Looking back, You can see how each moment before the day was not waiting but preparing. The subtle alignments, the quiet impulses, the sense of inevitability, even the ordinary events that seemed unrelated, were part of the same orchestration, and though the world would call it coincidence, you know it as the perfect order of an unseen hand, which is your own. The outer confirmation was sweet, yes, but it was never the deepest joy. The deeper joy was knowing that you could trust the law completely, that once you dwell in the end is secure. This trust frees you from the exhausting need to monitor, to doubt, to check for signs. You become the sign. Your very state becomes the proof. And now in this expanded awareness, the question of what else becomes more than curiosity. It becomes a kind of holy play. You see that you can reach into the well at will, drawing forth not only moments of gain, but states of being, transformations of self, entire new arrangements of life. And each one comes the same way, not by striving, but by remembering. The appointed date for the lottery was just one appointed date among countless others. Each desire has its own perfect hour, chosen not by the outer world, but by the inner readiness. The moment you accept it as done, the hour begins to move toward you, as inevitable as the tide returning to the shore. And as you breathe in this realization, another image begins to form, one that is not about winning, or dates, or outcomes, but about the origin of the one who imagines them all. For to know the law is to know its source, and to know its source is to know yourself in a way that changes everything you thought you understood about creation. And as you turn toward that origin, it is like walking back through a dream to the place where the dreamer lies sleeping. You begin to sense that the one who desired, who imagined, who saw the appointed date fulfilled, was never a separate fragment trying to persuade a distant God. You were, and are, the very life of God imagining through the pattern of your own being. The moment this truth touches you, the idea of chance falls away completely. There is no fortune to win, no luck to hope for. There is only the reflection of the state you claim as yours. The appointed day was nothing less than your own consciousness marking its perfect moment to reveal itself. And in the stillness of imagination, that moment already existed, complete and unchangeable. The world calls it future, but you know it as finished. Time was merely the servant carrying it to your senses. When you understand this, the memory of that date changes in flavor. You no longer see it as a miracle against the odds. You see it as the most natural thing in the world. The same way the sun rises without effort, the same way a seed breaks open in the dark, your inner assumption blossomed into form. You begin to realize that nothing else has ever truly happened in your life, but this, the outer taking the shape of the inner. The words you spoke, those few simple syllables, were more than a statement. They were the recognition of unity. You were speaking from the place where desire and fulfillment are one and the same. In that place, you were not trying to reach your creation. You were standing in it. And because you stood there, the world had no choice but to agree. Here is where the peace becomes unshakable. You know now that you can bring any scene into being, not because you are manipulating matter, but because matter has no life apart from the state you animate it with. This is why the law of assumption is absolute. It does not ask the outer for permission. It does not negotiate with circumstances. It simply reflects the image held in the depths of consciousness, and so the calendar itself loses its hold on you. You no longer think of waiting as a gap to be endured. You understand that waiting is nothing more than continuing to stand in the end until the senses agree. There is no strain in it, because you know the end is already yours. The day will arrive, as it always has, precisely on time, and that time is determined not by the turning of the clock, but by the rightness of your conviction. The appointed date for the lottery taught you this in a way that could not be forgotten. It showed you that the same stillness which brought numbers into alignment could bring every detail of your life into harmony. And as you hold that truth, you feel the gentle yet certain pull of something even greater. Not another desire, but the unveiling of the full stature of the one who imagines. For if the law is unerring, and if you are the one who operates it, then what limits could remain? What boundaries could hold? And as that question echoes in the depths of your being, you sense that you are on the threshold of a revelation so complete that even the appointed date was only its beginning. And as you stand at that threshold, you feel that the revelation ahead is not about adding more to yourself, but about removing the last veil from what you already are. The appointed date, the chosen words, the perfect unfolding, all of these were gentle introductions, showing you in fragments what is true in fullness. You have seen it in glimpses, the unity between thought and form, between inner speech and outer echo, between your unseen conviction and the visible day that met it. But now the invitation is to see, without fragmentation, to live as the whole. The mind may still whisper of methods and timing, of repeating what has worked before. Yet something deeper in you smiles at this, for you know the law is not a formula to be memorized, but a living movement to be embodied. You cannot truly repeat what happened, because nothing in creation repeats. It only expresses the same principle through infinite variations. What you experienced on that appointed date was not a rare event to be chased. It was the unchanging law revealing itself through a single beautiful arrangement. And that same law will express itself again, not because you try to recreate it, but because you live in its truth. You think back to the stillness that came before the outer proof, the days when you felt the result so clearly that you no longer looked for confirmation. That stillness is the key, for in it you were dwelling in the end. The world outside could not distract you, because the world inside was already complete. The ticket, the numbers, the draw, these were simply the shapes that stillness took when it stepped into time. It becomes clear now why living in the end is more than imagination alone. It is not enough to see the scene, you must abide there. To abide is to stop peeking at the calendar, to stop checking for signs, to rest in the truth that the thing desired is already done. This abiding gathers weight in the unseen, until the outer world, without struggle or delay, reflects it back to you. And so the date is never chosen at random. It arrives because the state is ready. You knew the date because you were already there in consciousness. You spoke the words because they were the natural language of one who has received. In that moment, the inner and outer were indistinguishable, two mirrors facing each other, reflecting the same image into infinity. From this vantage, you understand that what happened on that day was not limited to that day. It is happening always. The outer world is continually arriving from the state you occupy, continually shaping itself into the likeness of your assumption. If you live in fear, you see fear. If you live in plenty, you see plenty. And when you live in the end greets you on the appointed hour, with the same certainty as the rising of the sun. The beauty of this is that it frees you from the tyranny of how and when. You no longer plead with the world to give you what you seek. You no longer wrestle with the sequence of events. You simply choose the state. You dwell there, and you allow the unfolding to take its perfect course. The date is inevitable, the form is inevitable, because you have already accepted it in the only place creation occurs, within. And yet as this understanding deepens, there comes the quiet, almost electric awareness that the appointed date for that one desire was never meant to be the destination, it was the doorway. And beyond that doorway lies an even greater realization, one that is not about a single manifestation, but about the boundless nature of the self that manifests them all. And as you step through that doorway, the air feels different, lighter, clearer, as though something long hidden is now in plain sight. You realize that the appointed date was never simply about the manifestation itself, but about showing you your own limitlessness. It was the proof your outer mind thought it needed, yet as soon as it was given, you found you no longer required proof. For the one who has seen the law in motion cannot go back to the uncertainty of wondering if it works. You have touched the mechanism by which all things are made, and you know it to be yourself. The mind wants to hold on to the memory of the event, to replay the day, the moment, the feeling of the win. But the deeper part of you sees it differently, not as a single isolated success, but as a reflection of a truth that is constant. That same certainty you felt on that day can be entered into now, in this very breath, without needing the outer to match it. You understand now why the peace came before the proof, because the peace was the proof. You recall the sense of inevitability that wrapped itself around you as the day approached, how nothing in you questioned whether it would come to pass. That is the atmosphere of creation fulfilled. It is the quiet confidence of knowing that the inner decree has already gone forth and will not return void. In that state there is no struggle, no strain, only the natural unfolding of what already is. It becomes so clear now why the date could not have been guessed or calculated. It was not given to you by logic, but revealed to you by recognition. You were already standing in that scene in imagination, so when the calendar aligned, it felt like meeting an old friend. The words you spoke were the final acknowledgement, not the cause, of the manifestation. They were the outer echo of an inner song that had been playing long before you heard it with the ear. And here is the greater beauty. Once you know yourself as the one who appoints the hour inwardly, you stop fearing the unknown. You stop chasing signs and start resting in the truth that every scene has its own perfect moment to emerge, and that moment cannot be missed when you are already living in the end. The outer is not fragile, it is faithful. It must bear the image of your inner state, whether that state be fear or fulfillment. You see now that the appointed date for the lottery was only one note in a much larger symphony, a symphony in which you are both the composer and the listener, and if you could call forth that moment with such precision, what else could you call forth? What healing, what reunion, what abundance, what transformation? The law makes no distinction between them. And yet with this recognition, something even more profound begins to dawn. You start to understand that the real gift is not the ability to manifest countless outcomes, but the awakening to the fact that you and the source are indivisible. You are not borrowing power, you are the power in expression, the same power that fixed that date, drew those numbers, and guided your hand is the power that spoke the world into being. As you rest in this knowing, the question changes. It is no longer, can I create this, but what am I willing to remember as already mine? And as that question stirs in you, a new clarity begins to rise, one that will take you even deeper into the mystery of how all creation flows. And as that clarity rises, you begin to see that every creation, no matter how grand or small, flows from the same silent source. It does not strain to produce one thing more than another, nor does it measure the worthiness of the desire. It responds without hesitation, for it is not separate from you, it is you. The appointed date for the lottery was simply the clearest mirror you had ever been given, showing you your own authorship over time, over sequence, over the arrangement of events. Now that you have seen this, you cannot believe in uncertainty the way you once did. You recognize the same feeling that preceded that date, beginning to surface in other areas of life. It is a gentle, steady awareness that something is already yours, long before the outer makes it visible. You find yourself moving through your days with less urgency, for you know that the outer does not need to be pushed. It unfolds in its appointed hour, just as surely as that day once came to meet you. And this is where the mystery deepens, for you realize that even the feeling of inevitability was not something you created. It was given to you by the state you had entered. The moment you stepped into the assumption of the wish fulfilled, the sense of when became irrelevant, and yet paradoxically, the perfect when arose without effort. That is why the date came to you with such certainty. It was not your mind selecting it, it was your inner being revealing it. You remember how the world around you, in the days leading to it, seemed to conspire in subtle ways to remind you of your inner decision. A glimpse of the numbers, a fragment of a conversation overheard, a quiet sense that every step you took was leading you there. The outer was not deciding for you, it was obeying you. The seed had already been sown, and the harvest was inevitable. When the moment came, and you performed the outer act, there was no sense of creating anything new. It felt more like sealing something ancient, something that had been true long before your senses acknowledged it. The words you spoke were not a plea, but a declaration, and not to the world outside, but to the deeper self within. In that instant, there was no distance between the one who imagined and the one who experienced. Now you understand why living in the end is not simply about visualization, but about identity. You cannot persist in a state unless you are willing to accept it as who you are. And when you accept it as who you are, the outer world must treat it as fact. This is why the date, the ticket, the numbers all moved into place without strain. They had no choice but to take the shape of your conviction. The more you dwell in this truth, the more you see that every so-called future moment already exists in fullness. You are not creating from nothing, you are selecting from the infinite, and the selection is made, not by effort, but by being. This is why the law is so simple, yet so absolute. It does not fail, because it does not operate on chance, only on correspondence. And yet with this realization comes a deeper question, one that stirs not from desire, but from reverence. If every outcome is available now, and if the self you truly are stands outside of time, then what is the highest thing you could dare to claim? And as that question forms, you feel the stillness drawing you closer to an answer that has been waiting for you since the very beginning. And as that question lingers in the quiet, you begin to feel that it is not asking for an answer in words, but in being. The highest thing you could claim is not a possession, nor even an event, but the remembrance of yourself as the one who gives life to all possessions and all events. The appointed date, the chosen words, the perfect alignment of circumstance, these were but shadows cast by the light of your own awareness, and now that light turns inward, revealing the source from which it has always shone. It is here you realize that the truest form of living in the end is not bound to a single desire, but is the state of knowing that all ends already exist within you. You are not a traveler moving toward them, you are the still center from which they unfold. The world with all its movements is like a wheel turning around a fixed point, and that point is your awareness. To identify with that awareness is to step beyond the reach of doubt entirely. You recall the way the date once came to you, not as a plan, not as a wish, but as a certainty that required no explanation. That same certainty can rest upon anything you dare to claim. It is not fragile, for it is not dependent on the outer. It is the outer that depends upon it, as the shadow depends upon the object that casts it. This is why the appointed day arrived with such inevitability. The inner image was already formed, and the outer had only to reflect it. When you spoke the words, they were more than the final act, they were the embodiment of the state itself. You were not speaking to make it so, you were speaking because it was so. That is the secret hidden in plain sight. The world listens not to your words, but to the being from which they are spoken. And when the being is fulfillment, the outer scene must rise to meet it. Now you see why no detail of the unfolding was accidental. The place you stood, the time you moved, the feeling in your chest, the absence of doubt, all of it was the natural consequence of inhabiting the end. You had crossed the invisible threshold long before your senses caught up, and so the day felt less like a leap into the unknown, and more like the next breath in a rhythm you already knew. This is where the peace becomes unshakable. For if one scene can come forth in such perfect correspondence, then all scenes can. There is no scale, no large or small in the law. The same principle that aligned numbers and dates will align every other aspect of life, relationships, health, opportunity, even the seemingly impossible, if you will but dwell in the state and refuse to leave it. And yet, as this certainty grows, so does the awareness that the greatest use of this law is not in multiplying possessions, but in embodying the fullness of the self who creates them. To live from that place is to live beyond fear, beyond lack, beyond the restless searching for proof. It is to rest in the truth that you are already all that you seek. In this space, the mind grows quiet, not from discipline, but from recognition. There is nothing left to chase, because all is already given. And from that quiet, creation flows more freely than ever, not as a means of becoming, but as an expression of what already is. And as you settle into this knowing, you sense that another veil is ready to lift, one that will show you not only how the law operates through you, but how the one who imagines is inseparable from the one imagined. And as that veil begins to lift, you feel the faint trembling of a truth, so vast it can only be received in stillness. The one who imagines, and the one imagined, are not two. The scene you saw, the date you felt, the words you spoke, all of them arose from the same essence that you call I. There was never a gap between the dreamer and the dream. There was only the appearance of separation, so that you might taste the sweetness of recognition when the two were seen as one. The appointed date, in this light, becomes something even more sacred. It was not merely the hour when numbers aligned or fortune smiled. It was the moment when the mask of division slipped, and you glimpsed the unity that has always been. You thought you were standing on the threshold of a desire fulfilled, but in truth, you were standing in the presence of yourself, clothed in the form of that desire. This is why the feeling was so whole, so complete, even before the outer evidence appeared. You were not waiting for something to happen, you were living the happening itself, and in that living, time rearranged itself, so that the outer world could show you what you already knew. The date was not the cause, it was the reflection of the inner hour that had already struck. When the words left your lips, they were not cast into an empty space hoping to be heard. They were spoken within the chamber of your own being, where the echo was instant, because there was no distance for it to travel. And that echo, that inner agreement, was the true manifestation. The outer result was simply its shadow. In the quiet after, when the excitement of the world had passed, you may have noticed a deeper calm settling over you. It was not the relief of having gained, but the peace of having remembered. You had touched the truth, that the outer is always the servant, never the master, that the seen is forever bowing to the unseen, that the imagining is the same I appearing. From this place, creation becomes a gentle art. You no longer strain to bring things into being, for you see they are already there in fullness. You move toward them not to create them, but to meet them, and the meeting is always perfectly timed. The date is inevitable, because the state is unshakable, and so you live differently. The calendar no longer dictates your hope, for every day is the appointed day for something you have already accepted within. The waiting is not empty, it is rich with the awareness that all is unfolding from the center of your own being. Even the smallest desire is treated with the same reverence, for each one is another opportunity to see yourself reflected in form. Yet in the midst of this gentle mastery, you feel the stirrings of an even greater knowing, that if the dreamer and the dream are one, then there is no outer at all, no other to convince, no world to persuade. There is only the self, endlessly expressing, endlessly recognizing itself in new ways, and as that knowing begins to deepen, you sense you are on the edge of a revelation that will dissolve the final illusion of separation entirely. And as that final illusion begins to soften, it is as though the last thin mist is lifting from a landscape that has always been here. You see that the separation between inner and outer was never real, only a useful shadow, cast so that you might play the game of seeking and finding. The appointed date, the words, the visible result, all of it was you speaking to yourself in the language of form. You were the sender and the receiver, the giver and the given, the one who imagined and the one who lived the imagining. This is why the moment felt so deeply familiar. You were not encountering something new, but recognizing yourself in another shape. Even the anticipation before the day was not the tension of waiting, but the joy of knowing you would soon meet yourself face to face in a form you had chosen. The world calls this coincidence, or luck, or probability. But to you it is the most intimate act of self-recognition. The law works this way because there is nothing outside the self to resist it. The scene in imagination and the scene in the world are not two different realities. They are one reality experienced from two vantage points. When you live in the end, you are standing at the center of that reality, and every expression of it must bow to the state you have claimed. And so the date itself was never an answer to a request. It was the hour when the inner and outer were seen as one. You could feel it coming because it was already here. The words you spoke were not a signal to begin. They were the seal upon what had always been complete. And in that sealing, you knew there was no going back, because there had never been a before to return to. This is the reason peace remains, after the outer has shifted. It is not the peace of having gained something uncertain. It is the peace of realizing you were never without it. And this realization begins to move through every corner of your life. You no longer try to manipulate conditions, because conditions are only the mirrored surface of a deeper truth. You no longer chase signs, because you have become the sign. Now the simplicity of the law stands before you in its purest form. You imagine, you feel it real, you abide, and the world conforms. No exceptions, no degrees, no hierarchy of difficulty. The appointed date for the lottery was simply the clearest example the world could give you. And now that you have lived it, you see it everywhere. You see it in the way conversations align, in how doors open, in how the most ordinary hours deliver extraordinary correspondence to your state. And with this seeing comes the quiet understanding that the true prize was never the win, never the numbers, never the money. It was the unveiling of the self that needs nothing added to be whole. That self is the source of all days, all scenes, all worlds. From here the question is no longer will it happen, but what aspect of myself will I choose to reveal next? And as you let that question breathe in you, you feel that the answer is already forming, not as a thought, but as a living state, ready to be worn, ready to be seen, ready to take its perfect shape in the world that is only your own reflection. And as that living state begins to take form within you, it carries the same quiet certainty that once surrounded the appointed date. There is no rush, no grasping, no thought of how or when. You simply know. The knowing feels as natural as breathing, as though it has always been there, waiting for you to notice it. This is the same current that once drew you to that precise day, the same invisible hand that placed the words upon your tongue. It is the movement of your own being, shaping itself into the next reflection you will meet in the outer world. You understand now that the outer has never been the cause of anything. The date, the winning, the unfolding of events, they were all effects. The cause was always the state you occupied, the unseen conviction that lived so fully within you, that the world had no choice but to reflect it. Once you see this, you are freed from the exhausting effort of trying to control conditions. You no longer rearrange the mirror. you changed the image before it. This is why the appointed date felt so inevitable. You had already arrived there in imagination, and so time merely delivered what you were already holding. You could feel its approach, because you were already standing in its presence. And when the hour came, you moved without hesitation. The act was not the cause but the confirmation. The words you spoke were the seal on a truth too certain to be denied. And it is here that the law becomes more than a tool, it becomes a way of being. You no longer practice it as something separate from life, for you see that it is life. Every moment is an appointed date for something, whether you recognize it or not. The world is always showing you the state you most consistently inhabit. What you meet outwardly is simply the harvest of what you have planted inwardly, whether in faith or in fear. The beauty is that you can choose, at any moment, which seed to plant. The process is the same for every desire. Assume it is already done. Feel it in its completion. Rest there without strain. And as surely as night yields to morning, the world will take the shape of your assumption. The outer is obedient, because it has no life of its own. It only borrows the life you give it. And so you begin to live with a kind of holy ease. You no longer need the world to prove itself to you, for you are the proof. You walk with the calm of one who knows that the unseen is more real than the seen, and that every appointed hour will arrive in perfect correspondence to the state you have chosen. The same law that set one date in motion will set them all. Yet even as this knowing deepens, something in you senses there is more to see, not more to get, but more to remember. The appointed date for the lottery was a demonstration, a living parable. It showed you the truth in a form your senses could grasp. But behind the form is the formless, behind the event is the eternal, and it is toward that eternal source, the place where all dates, all scenes, all forms are born, that your attention now begins to turn. And as your attention turns toward that eternal source, it feels less like looking forward, and more like falling back into something that has always been here. There is no movement through distance, only the deepening recognition that you have never been apart from it. The appointed date, the spoken words, the outer manifestation, they were only ripples on the surface of this vast still ocean. Beneath those ripples is the infinite depth from which all forms rise, and to which they all return. It is here that time itself loosens its hold on you. You begin to see that every appointed date exists now, fully formed, resting in the invisible. The calendar does not bring them closer. Your acceptance brings them into sight. The lottery win was not summoned from absence. It was revealed from fullness. And just as that one scene was brought forth, so too can any other be called into view. The mind may still whisper that certain things are rare, difficult, improbable, but now you know better. You have seen with your own eyes that the improbable is only the unseen, and that the unseen becomes visible the moment you abide in it without contradiction. You no longer treat the outer as a gatekeeper. You recognize it as a servant, arranging itself in perfect obedience to the state you occupy. You remember how, before the date arrived, there was no sense of struggle. You were not watching the clock, not counting the days. You had already crossed the finish line inwardly, and the outer simply followed. This is why the hour felt inevitable, because it was not the beginning of something new, but the unveiling of something timeless. When you spoke the chosen words, you were not sending out a request. You were echoing the voice of the eternal, within you, the I am that declares itself into form. That inner voice does not plead, does not bargain, does not hope, it knows. And when you speak from that knowing, the outer must yield. This is why the memory of that day carries such stillness. It is not the outer details that remain alive in you, but the atmosphere of certainty that wrapped itself around you. You have touched the place where nothing is missing, where all is already done, and from that place the entire world feels different. You see through its movements, knowing that they are only the choreography of a reality already chosen, and now that same stillness begins to fill more and more of your life. You walk through each day, aware that you are already surrounded by unseen completions, each waiting for its perfect hour to appear. The law has not changed, only your awareness of it has deepened. You no longer plant seeds with doubt in your heart. You plant them in the soil of assurance, knowing that the harvest is inevitable. Yet even in this assurance, a subtle invitation calls you deeper, to step beyond even the joy of demonstration, into the knowing of yourself as the source of every scene. For if you are the one who calls the date, speaks the word, and lives the outcome, then what could possibly be beyond your reach? And as you lean into that question, you can feel that the next revelation is already stirring, waiting to step forward in its appointed moment. And as that next revelation begins to stir, it comes not as a flash of thought, but as a deep, steady warmth, as if something within you is reminding you of a truth too vast to rush. You sense that the appointed date, the sacred words, the perfect manifestation, these were not isolated wonders, but reflections of a law that has no exceptions. The same life that moved through that moment, moves through all moments, and it waits only for your recognition to reveal itself in form. You begin to see that there is no real difference between that extraordinary hour and the quietest of your days. The difference was never in the event itself, but in the state you carried into it. When you lived in the end, the outer could not resist you. When you wandered from it, the outer mirrored that too. The world has been flawless in its obedience to your assumption. It always has been. You think back to the days before that date, and remember how natural it all felt. You were not forcing belief, not wrestling with doubt. The end was so real to you that the outer unfolding seemed almost incidental. You could feel the hour coming, not because of signs or calculations, but because you were already dwelling in its fulfillment. And when it came, it simply matched the inner scene you had held as truth. That is why the chosen words carried such power. They were not magic in themselves. They were the audible form of an inner conviction that had already created the outcome. The outer scene was only catching up to what had been spoken in the silence long before. In that moment your speech and your being were one. And now you begin to understand the deeper rhythm of creation. It is not about pushing the outer into place, but about resting so deeply in the inner fact that the outer is compelled to take its shape. Time, place, and circumstance are the servants of your state, not its masters. The appointed date was simply the scene in which the truth could be revealed without obstruction. This is why peace remains with you even now. The peace is not tied to that single outcome. It is tied to the knowing that the same law that brought it forth will bring forth every other fulfillment you choose to abide in. You have crossed a threshold where impossible is no longer a word that holds meaning. If the unseen can become the seen once, it can do so without limit. And yet in the quiet of this realization, there is a beckoning towards something even greater, to see not only that you are the one who appoints the day, but that you are also the day itself, the scene, the unfolding, the entire story. If there is no separation between dreamer and dream, then there is nothing outside of you to resist you, nothing beyond you to grant or withhold. As this truth begins to settle, it brings with it a stillness deeper than any you have known, the kind of stillness in which creation happens without effort, as naturally as breathing. And in that stillness, you feel that the next unveiling is already here, waiting for you to step into it as you once stepped into that appointed hour. And as you step into that stillness, you notice how easily it holds you, how naturally it carries the sense that all is already finished. There is no effort here, no sense of reaching for what is missing, because nothing is missing. This is the same quiet that surrounded you before the appointed date, the same certainty that needed no proof. Back then it was tied to a single scene, a chosen hour, a set of numbers. Now it expands beyond all boundaries, embracing every aspect of your life in the same inevitability. You see now that the appointed date was never about chance or probability. It was about learning the language of your own being, the way your inner state speaks to the outer world without words. When you were living in the end, the world responded as if it had no other choice, because in truth it did not. The law does not negotiate, it mirrors, and it mirrored you perfectly. You remember how that hour unfolded without strain. There was no need to push, no need to watch for signs, because you were already carrying the end within you. The day did not bring the result, it simply revealed what was already real in consciousness. And when you spoke the appointed words, they were not an attempt to create, but the natural exhale of a creation already complete. The more you dwell in this understanding, the more you see that time is never an obstacle. The calendar does not dictate fulfillment, your state does. When the state is firmly held, the moment of manifestation is as certain as the turning of the seasons. The appointed date was the point where inner readiness met outer expression, but that readiness can be chosen at any moment. This is why you no longer cling to outcomes. You know now that what you hold in imagination with persistence must appear. It is not a question of if, but only of how fully you are willing to dwell in the feeling of completion. Once you stand there inwardly, the outer moves with a precision that feels like destiny, yet destiny of your own making. And as this recognition deepens, you begin to sense a more profound layer of truth, that the very desire you once thought you were fulfilling, was in reality fulfilling you. It was shaping you into the one who knows themselves as cause, as source, as the operant power. The appointed date was not the end of that shaping, but the beginning of a greater unveiling. Now you walk through the world with a different kind of vision. You see every interaction, every object, every moment as a mirror of the unseen state within. The distinction between ordinary and extraordinary fades, because the same law governs all. Whether you choose a date for a lottery or a moment for a new life to unfold, the process is the same. You imagine it, you live in its end, you let the outer world rise to meet you, and somewhere in that seeing, a gentle question emerges: if all scenes, all dates, all outcomes are already here, resting in the fullness of the unseen, then what would it mean to live every moment as though it were the appointed hour? The question stirs something deep within you, and you can feel that stepping into that answer will change not only what you create, but the very way you exist. And as you let that question settle into you, it begins to move like a soft tide through every corner of your awareness. What would it mean to live as though the appointed hour were always now? You feel how the body relaxes at the thought, how the mind quiets, how the air itself seems to grow still around you. There is no urgency in such a state, no leaning forward into tomorrow. You stand exactly where you are, and yet all things feel present, complete and quietly certain. This was the essence you touched before that chosen date arrived. The feeling that the moment was already secure, already woven into the fabric of your life. It was not anticipation in the worldly sense, it was remembrance. You did not have to push the day toward you, because you were already there in consciousness. The outer simply moved into alignment with the reality you had claimed. The more you recall it, the more you understand that nothing about it was exceptional in the eyes of the law. The numbers, the ticket, the hour, these were only forms, and forms are infinitely replaceable. The true event was the union between your inner state and its perfect reflection. That union is not rare, it is always available, for it is the nature of reality itself. You realize now that to live as though the appointed hour is always now, is to dissolve the very idea of waiting. Waiting suggests absence, but in truth there is no absence in consciousness. All that you could ever desire exists in fullness now, clothed in the invisible until you consent to wear it in form. The calendar only appears to mark its arrival. In truth it was always here. This is why the words you spoke on that day carried such stillness. They were not rushed, not desperate. They were the natural speech of one who has already received. And that same speech, spoken now over any chosen scene, will bear the same fruit, not because of the words themselves, but because of the being from which they are spoken. Living in this way transforms the texture of life. You no longer measure your state by the outer's confirmation, you measure it by the depth of your own certainty, and as that certainty grows, you find that the outer world becomes increasingly gentle in its obedience. Things arrive without strain, align without force, and often in ways more perfect than anything you could have arranged with reason alone. Yet this is not passivity, it is the highest form of activity, the activity of resting in the end until the end cannot help but appear. You understand now why the date was not chosen by thought, but revealed by recognition. The state itself contained the timing, the place, the unfolding. Once the state was assumed, everything else was inevitable. And now as you move in this expanded awareness, another thought comes quietly, without urgency yet with great weight. If the appointed hour can be felt before it comes, can it also be felt as eternal, unending, free from the rise and fall of moments? The thought does not demand an answer. It simply opens a space in you, a space that feels like stepping even deeper into the truth, that there is no separation between the one who imagines and the one who lives the imagining.
And as you rest in that space, you begin to sense that the eternal appointed hour is not a moment you reach, but a reality you inhabit. It does not approach you from the future, nor does it slip away into the past. It is here, suspended in the stillness behind all movement, as constant as the light that exists, whether the eyes are open or closed. You feel it not as a passing event, but as a state of being, the state in which all that you could ever wish is already fulfilled. The mind may search for beginnings and endings, for dates and sequences, but the heart knows that fulfillment is outside of time. Just as the seed contains the tree in perfect form, so too does your present awareness contain the finished picture. When you lived the scene of that appointed date, you were not waiting for the result. You were entering into what already was. The calendar was only a stage prop, a pointer for your physical senses, while in truth the manifestation existed in fullness before the day ever dawned. You understand now that the power is never in the number you circle on the wall, or the phrase you whisper at a certain hour. The power is in the invisible assumption that precedes them, the quiet inner act that clothes the unseen in the substance of belief. Once that belief is alive in you,
The world bends to it as effortlessly as shadows follow form. This is why you can release the anxious grasping for signs. The sign is always the state itself. If you feel the end as real, you have already crossed the invisible line into possession. The outer is only catching up, rearranging itself in obedience to your unseen command. And whether it takes the shape of a ticket, a letter, a conversation, or a sudden change of circumstance, it cannot fail to arrive, for it is already yours. The more you dwell in this understanding, the more sacred each moment becomes. You find yourself less concerned with the mechanics of how or when, and more devoted to the purity of the inner vision. You realize that to live in the end is not to strain for the end, but to relax so completely into it that the distinction between wanting and having disappears. Even now you can feel that reality stirring within you, the sense that nothing is missing, that all is perfectly aligned. And in that feeling, the desire that once seemed so specific and urgent dissolves into something larger, the knowing that you are the source, the creator, the one from whom all scenes flow. It is in this knowing that the greatest shift occurs. For if the appointed date is not fixed in time, but in consciousness, then every breath you take can be the breath of fulfillment. Every step can be the walk of one who has already received. And if that is true, then the outer must yield, over and over, in ways that exceed even the brightest outlines of your imagining. And somewhere within this revelation, a quiet awareness forms. If the outer is always the shadow of the inner, then there is no limit to what may be cast upon it. And perhaps the question is not what single thing you will bring forth, but how vast and luminous a reality you are willing to assume as already yours. And as you sit with that thought, the edges of limitation begin to blur. You sense that the question has never been about a single moment of gain, but about the vastness of the inner kingdom you are willing to inhabit. The lottery ticket, the date, the words you spoke, these were never the destination, only the doorway. Through them you glimpsed the truth, that your inner world is an inexhaustible treasury, and you alone hold the key. You recall how easily the scene had formed in the silence. It was not the work of effort, but of surrender, the way a mirror accepts an image without strain. You did not labor to make it appear, you simply allowed it to be. And in that allowing, you entered into possession without the burden of proof or explanation. You became the one who already has, and the outer was compelled to agree. This is the law in its purest form. To him that hath shall be given, not because the world is unjust, but because the world reflects only the state it perceives. To have in consciousness is to have in fact. The outer is a shadow, and the shadow cannot lead, it must follow. Feel how this changes the way you see your desires. No longer are they distant peaks to be climbed. They are already inscribed within you, waiting only for your recognition. The moment you claim them inwardly, you are standing at the summit, and the path beneath you rearranges itself to match. The more faithfully you abide in that summit state, the more swiftly the outer aligns. There is no bargaining here, no pleading with some power outside yourself. The power is your own imagining, clothed in the certainty of being. When you said the words on that appointed day, they were not a request, they were a declaration from one who had entered into the end and made it home. That is why they carried weight. That is why they bore fruit. And as you let this sink deeper, you realize there is nothing stopping you from choosing again. Now with the same still assurance, you can clothe yourself in any outcome, any scene, any blessing, and the law will answer in kind. For it is not the scene that is sacred, but the state in which you dwell. Rest here for a moment, feeling the truth of this. Let it dissolve the idea of waiting, of hoping, of reaching. Let it open the possibility that what you once thought required time may be as immediate as a shift in your own awareness. And in that quiet, another knowing stirs, that perhaps the greatest act is not to choose one single fulfillment, but to abide so deeply in the state of the fulfilled that all things flow to you without measure. It begins to dawn on you that the state itself is the treasure, and once you are in it, the outer form is almost incidental. The ticket, the numbers, the date, these are symbols, gentle props that help the mind settle into the knowing. But the true wealth is not in the paper, or the prize, it is in the unshakable awareness that what you imagine with feeling becomes the world you walk in. You see now why the exact date mattered. It was not that a cosmic clock had decreed that only then could the blessing arrive, but that your own inner rhythm aligned so completely with the scene that the date became inevitable. Time itself bent to meet you, not because it is master over you, but because it is servant to your assumption. That day was the day your inner harvest reached its ripening. The outer had no choice but to reflect it. In this stillness, you begin to understand that all time is now. The day you wait for is not ahead of you, it is contained in the state you occupy. When you enter that state, and remain there, you are standing in the middle of the fulfillment, regardless of what the calendar says. And because the outer must match the inner, the appointed hour appears in perfect order, as naturally as sunrise follows night. It is here that faith ceases to be a strained belief in something unseen, and becomes the quiet certainty of one who knows. The seed sown in the darkness does not worry about its growth. It rests in the soil, knowing the light will call it forth. In the same way, once you have spoken your inner word, and clothed yourself in its reality, you rest. You need not watch the ground, for the harvest is sure. This is why your words on that day carried the weight of creation. They were not wishful murmurs, but the speech of one who already stands within the answered prayer. You had rehearsed them inwardly, until they were no longer a hope but a truth. And when you spoke them aloud, the world heard the vibration of a fulfilled state, and rearranged itself accordingly. As you feel this, a deeper freedom opens. You realize you can do this with anything, not only the lottery, not only money, but health, love, joy, peace. You can enter the state of already having, and the world will rush to confirm it. You need only choose, and having chosen, remain. And yet there is another layer waiting, a hidden door in the temple of your own being, one that changes not only what you receive, but who you know yourself to be. It is a quiet shift, almost imperceptible at first, yet it changes the whole landscape within you. Until now, the focus has been upon the thing desired, the winning ticket, the sum, the date. But as you stand here, deeper in the stillness, you sense that these outer forms are but the garments of something far greater. The real transformation is not in the appearance of the prize, but in the unveiling of the one who commands it. For when you look closely, you see that the you who first reached for the desire is not the same you who now holds it in consciousness. The timid seeker has given way to the assured creator. The scattered mind has gathered itself into a single flame of intention. The outer manifestation may bring delight, but the inner recognition brings dominion. This is why the prophet spoke not merely of blessings received, but of names restored. To receive a new name is to awaken to a new identity. No longer are you the one who hopes, but the one who knows. No longer are you subject to fortune, but fortune is subject to you. What seemed like chance was never chance at all, but the mirror reflecting your secret assumption. The date, the phrase, the ticket, these were but training wheels for the soul, gentle guides that taught you how to enter a state and remain there. But now, standing in this new awareness, you see you could lay aside the props and still command the outcome, for the source of all outcomes is within. Before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. It is not the calendar that answers, nor the numbers, but the I am that speaks through you. Let yourself feel the gravity of this. It is not a theory to be remembered, but a mantle to be worn. This shift in identity is the true prize, for once worn, it cannot be taken from you. It becomes the lens through which all future desires are fulfilled. You walk as one who has already arrived, and therefore all things hasten to greet you. And yet in the hush of this awareness, there is an even subtler revelation. For if all things are reflections of the state you occupy, then even the act of choosing becomes a sacred art. There is a way to choose that opens doors no man can shut, a way that makes the so-called improbable bend its knee before you. It is the quality of your choice that shapes the world around you, not the size of the desire. Most move through life making decisions from the shallow surface of circumstance, reacting to what appears, rather than creating from the depths of what is unseen. But when you choose from the state of the wish fulfilled, your decision carries the weight of inevitability. It is no longer a request, it is a decree. This is the sacred art of choosing, to select not merely a thing, but a reality. When you choose, you are not picking from what exists in the outer world, you are summoning into form what already is in the unseen. The world may label it luck or coincidence, but you know it as the unfolding of an invisible selection made in silence. Imagine yourself standing in the inner chamber of your own being, a place where no one else can enter, where the noise of the world cannot reach you. In this sanctuary, you see before you a table set with infinite possibilities. Each outcome, each scene, each life already exists here, whole and complete. You are not creating them in that moment. They have been prepared from the foundation of the world. All you do is take the one you desire into your hands, hold it to your heart, and declare it to be yours. When the prophets spoke of asking and receiving, of knocking and doors being opened, they were not instructing you to plead with a distant God, but to recognize that within your own consciousness lies the storehouse of all that you could ever call yours. To knock is to turn your attention toward the thing desired. To ask is to assume its reality, and to receive is to dwell in the feeling that it is already so. In the matter of the lottery, the same truth applies. You are not truly waiting for a draw, for a machine, or for numbers to align. You are choosing the reality in which you already have the winning ticket in hand.
You feel the paper between your fingers. You see the print upon it. You hear the quiet announcement within you. It is done. And when you leave the sanctuary of your imagination, you walk as one who already possesses it, unshaken by what the senses report. The world may call such certainty foolish, but the world's wisdom is folly in the eyes of spirit. You do not wait to see the number printed before you believe. You believe, and therefore the number appears. This is why the exact date matters only to the extent that it becomes the bridge for your mind to cross into belief. Once you have crossed, the date itself bends to serve you. And if the date, the phrase, the ticket are but servants to the deeper law, then what lies beyond them? What happens when you begin to choose without props, without outward signs, resting only in the invisible certainty of who you are? It is here, without props or signs, that the true power reveals itself. You no longer need to trace your faith upon the calendar, or anchor it to the numbered slips of paper. You stand before the infinite as its own likeness, knowing that the act of imagining is the act of creating, and in this knowing, there is rest, not the rest of inactivity, but the deep stillness of one who has already arrived. This is the summit, toward which all earlier steps have led, the recognition that you are not one who must wait, nor one who must hope, but one who simply is. The outer events that unfold, whether they come through a lottery, a gift or the reshaping of your affairs, are but shadows cast by the light you carry within. The world will still speak of luck, of timing, of chance, but you will smile, for you know the truth. You have learned to live in the end, not merely visit it in moments of wishful thought. You have felt the reality before it took form, and in that feeling, you have dissolved the distance between desire and possession. This is why the Master said, when you pray, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. He spoke not of the outer posture, nor of the words uttered aloud, but of this inner stance, the quiet assurance that what you are in consciousness, you are in truth. And because consciousness clothes itself in form, the world has no choice but to yield its evidence. There is a sweetness in this awareness, a gentleness that no striving can produce. You are free, not because you hold the thing in your hand, but because you hold it in your being. Whether the outer reflects it today or tomorrow, is of no concern. The harvest is already reaped in the invisible, and yet life does not grow still here. If anything, it becomes more alive. For when you know yourself as the source, you see each desire, not as a lack but as a new door to walk through. You may still choose dates, you may still speak phrases, you may still delight in the play of forms, but you do so with the laughter of one who knows the outcome is secured before the act begins. In this freedom, you stand where all prophets and seers have stood, where the veil between the seen and unseen is thin as breath, and you realize that the greatest prize was never the gold, nor the number, nor the day marked on the calendar. The greatest prize was to awaken to yourself, the dreamer who dreams and knows the dream is real. And as you walk forward, you carry this with you. The world will mirror it, fortune will bow to it, and every door, seen and unseen, will open at your approach. For you have entered the kingdom, and the kingdom is within you.